Welcome to our webinar today, where I'm joined by two of our industry heavyweights. I've got Heiko Wederhase, who's the CEO of Efficient, and I've got Ian van Schuur, who's the CEO of AdviceWorks. And together, we're going to be exploring what it takes to run and to grow a successful advisor network in today's challenging world. I'm Georgina Smith, and it's my privilege to run the Innate Distribution and Client Servicing team. But before we get started today, let's just cover a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to have a load shedding interruption at about 10 o'clock. We're going to go off air for about 15 seconds. Please do stay with us while our astronaut gets us back online. CPD. This session has been submitted for one CPD point. A quick note on CPD, for those of you who watched today's webinar in full, you'll receive a full CPD certificate automatically via email. For anyone who didn't join us at the start of today, or has to drop off early, or you're watching via someone else's registration link, you'll have to answer a few questions via a survey at the end, and we will send you your CPD certificate following the receipt of those questions. As always, we're happy to take questions, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the session today. You can ask them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen there, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can at the end of today's session. So, without further ado, let me introduce my two guests. Heiko Wederhase. He set up Efficient 20 years ago in 2002 with his good friend and business partner, Davi Root. He started at his mum's kitchen table. And since then, Efficient has grown into a very well-respected group of companies spanning a large part of the value chain, including advisory, multi-manager, and Manco. And with over 500 employees, 237 advisors, and 380 billion assets under management, Efficient is absolutely one of South Africa's success stories. Welcome, Heiko.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thanks. And my second guest is Ian van Schuur, who founded AdviceWorks 10 years after Heiko in 2012, after a long and illustrious career in Standard Bank and Liberty. AdviceWorks' success has been in building a robust advice process which leverages off their wide-ranging investment capabilities, including their 12 portfolio managers, which offer clients predictable outcomes focused on their lifestyle goals. With over 140 financial practices and growing rapidly, AdviceWorks is also a company South Africa should be very proud of. Welcome, Ian.
Georgina, thank you.
So Heiko, if I might start with you.
Sure.
Perhaps you can tell us a little bit of Efficient's history. How did you get where you are? What's the story? And perhaps some of the really key milestones that you had to overcome, places where you turned left instead of right.
Absolutely, thank you, yes. Actually, after I left school, I ended up in the canning industry. And I've been involved in canning millions of cases of baked beans, spaghetti, etc. So the stock market was really my hobby since I left school. I also had a transport company. I farmed with live chickens, and I grew tomatoes. So all around, pretty busy boy. But the stock market, as I said, has always been my hobby. And when the opportunity arose in the late 1990s, with my mother's husband inheriting a small portfolio, we decided to set up a little business, and he started looking after, assisting advisors to look after their clients' portfolios, and this was very popular, and I soon realized that this is now the opportunity to turn a hobby into something of a business, and I exited all my other interests, and we set up, together with a team, we set up Efficient Frontiers in 2002. We said we're going to grow to 500 million, and then we're going to close shop and look after those clients and those advisors, and the rest is history. So it's been a marathon. There's been a lot of events along the way. We've been listed, we've been delisted to raise capital, to further grow the business. But all in all, a great journey.
And where would you say were some of the really key pivotal points for you, where you made decisions that could have been make or break?
Choosing our partners. I think that is what it's all about in business. And I've been very fortunate to have been able to get the right people on our board to provide that leadership at board level. I think that has really been valuable. And my business partners in everything, whether it's head of compliance, head of legal, marketing. I've just been very fortunate to be able to get the competent, well-qualified, trustworthy people on board that have really helped me to build this business.
That's fantastic. It's all about the people, right?
It's all about the people.
Yeah, yeah. Ian, perhaps you could tell us a bit about AdviceWorks' story.
Sure, yeah, that's an interesting story. Nice one. Yeah, ours was also an interesting journey. I mean, we've all come out of, funnily enough, the Stanlib stable. So most of you talk about people. I think people are the key. So most of our key people have all come from Stanlib. So we founded, well, I was one of the founding, I suppose, or founders of Stanlib back in 2002 when you started your business. So it's interesting we're on this side of the table, Georgina. It's a bit ironic, I suppose. But I think it hasn't been so much a journey for me, it's been a journey for these people. So we had a very interesting start. I mean, back in about 2008, 2009, we sent a group of 6 executives, as they were then, so we were working for the big corporates, as one does, and we made a strategic decision to go and investigate how we could change big corporate sales businesses, so financial planning businesses, into much more advice-led businesses. We were worried about lots of pieces of the value chain, technology. We were worried about, what we were seeing in the UK. Some of them are selling risk, so we basically took 6 guys and we went and we looked at businesses in Australia, so the networks, New Zealand, which, funnily enough, I mean, the land of the long cloud was then renowned for technology. Anyway, we went and we spent a lot of time in Central Europe and looked at a lot of businesses, and the idea was to actually investigate deep-seated advice-driven businesses and come back and present how we could actually make a massive change to the financial planning landscape through 2 big corporates. Anyway, we didn't get to do that change for various reasons. And 5 of those 6 guys are at AdviceWorks today. So our journey comes from an interrogation, a belief of how advice practices and the future of advice would change. So a little bit different to yours, but I think we've landed at a similar conclusion.
And tell me, Ian, again, some of the really key moments were, those pivot points where you could go horribly wrong.
And you can, I nearly swore, you can mess it up badly. So I think the critical thing for us was raise enough capital up front, because if you build a business, you would have experienced this, if you build a business hard enough, you can't have a solvency crisis and start looking for capital at the same time. The team piece, absolutely critical. But there's another interesting thing on the team piece is not everybody's fit for being in an entrepreneurial world. So whether it's greed or fear, the people you start with aren't always the people you end with. And you're going to lose some great people along the way for various reasons. And then ownership models and what's happening with ownership and operational independence, I think, is a critical turning point, and probably the hardest one for me anyway, just because I'm not really as tech savvy as some of my colleagues, but is technology and the role of technology in building more efficient businesses. I think those have kind of been the big ones for us.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something that I think really intrigues me. You need different people in your business at different points in their life cycle, right? Yeah. And what does it really take? What are the characteristics you need, Ian, to be like a really successful entrepreneur, but actually take that business to the next step? What is it that you need?
Yeah. So I think I stumbled into entrepreneurship, if that's the right terminology, by accident. So I don't think I wanted to dive in and become an entrepreneur, not at all. I battled with the migration from corporate to entrepreneurism, if that's the right terminology. I think I stepped across the Rubicon, if that's the right word, for a different reason. It's because we had a very fixed belief or very strong conviction around the future of something, the future of advice, and how we'd see the landscape change. So I think we came from that perspective and kind of had to change because of conviction. The other piece, though, maybe to answer your question a little bit, is I think a lot of new businesses these days are about disruption and change, and I think if you get into disruption, it's hard. So our business model is very disruptive. it's quite hard because you've got to have real strong conviction, and I think you've got to have resilience, because the status quo wants to pull you backwards. And so I think you've got to have conviction around stuff. And I think in the new world of entrepreneurialism, I think you've got to have that. And then, as you say, you've got to have diverse capabilities and skills.
Yeah.
So that's what we found.
And that status quo it feels safe, right? It feels like your comfort blanket, but actually you've still got to
Yeah,
keep
traditional
pressing.
businesses are hard to break,
Yeah.
because that's why they, I guess, traditional.
Yeah, absolutely. Heiko, what would you say? I mean,
Yeah,
it feels like you're more naturally an entrepreneur. I mean,
Yeah,
you've
for us,
done-
it's been exactly the
Yeah.
opposite. And I mean, being an entrepreneur, I understand entrepreneurs, and I think that's helped us to grow the business because we partner with a lot of entrepreneurs. So that definitely helps. And I've brought in lots of corporate people into our organization, and we've learned from them. But I think what has really helped us is we were a bunch of entrepreneurs building this business, and then we decided to list because we didn't have the money to grow it to what we wanted it to be. So we needed this capital, and somehow we decided that listing is a good idea. In 2009, right at the top of the market, we listed and raised sufficient capital, and now we had to comply with everything that was required being a listed entity. Fortunately, again, we got the right board members on board that had that experience of being listed, and we had to learn all this corporate governance, and being an entrepreneur, you like to pull the trigger immediately. Now you have to go through a process, investment committee, then the risk committee. It's a very different ballgame. But I think taking a business from an entrepreneurial mindset to a sustainable long-term corporate business, you need to have that. That's the foundation for the business. You need to have those people that help you to put all of that in place, because the entrepreneur is the individual. The business is an entity. It lives on its own, and you need to make it sustainable. And that part really helped us to make efficient and sustainable business.
And it sounds like you might have battled with perhaps the bureaucracy and red tape that might have come with being listed.
Look, I'm a German. I like bureaucracy and I like paperwork. They always tell me that. And I actually enjoy it. I mean, we have a policy how to write policies. So I'm probably not a good example, but I can promise you we've seen a lot of people come and go that really struggled with that.
So tell me, Heiko, you and I mean, and of course Ian, we speak to advisors on a daily basis, right? And I'm sure there'll be a lot watching today who kind of look at people like you and think, well, how do I get to my business to your kind of level? What are the sort of conversations you're having with advisors that are out there? What are the potholes you're seeing advisors perhaps not see that you would perhaps be looking at if you were in their position?
Look, I think advisors are entrepreneurs, and it's very difficult for an entrepreneur to make that mind shift change to join an organization. I've heard that how many times. I don't want to be part of a corporate. I've worked for a corporate. I've been there. I don't want to go back to a corporate. And it's really for us finding the balance between being a corporate and remaining an entrepreneurial business, that culture. And I think we've been very successful at that. So our focus is really on you do what you're good at as an entrepreneur, which is client relationships and doing business with your client and building your client base, and let us take care of the admin, the stuff that typically an entrepreneur is not too crazy about. They want to build and grow and that sort of thing. So those are probably some of the key conversations. Other one, of course, is technology. The way of doing things in the past, spreadsheets and building a database of client information, that's very topical. It's becoming more and more topical. We need that to comply. We need that to value your business. We need that to deliver a better service to the client. And I think that is still a challenge, but I think we are making progress in that space.
Yeah, Ian, what do you see advisors kind of battling with, struggling with?
Yeah, I mean, so the classic potholes. I mean, I think the technology one's an obvious one. I think more on the technology piece is they see technology as a panacea to a solution, and I don't think it's so much technology. I think it's integration of technology. So the trick now in the technology space is not a piece of the value chain. It's how you integrate it, and that's where your efficiency comes from. So, and it means as a business owner, you've actually got to understand the architecture of the technology piece, not just the independent component parts. So many times I ask an advisor what tech they're using, and they say, I'm using Xpan, or CRM system, and that's part of the piece. So technology for one, most definitely. I think there's a polarization at the moment as well, a polarization of people trying to decide what they want to be. So polarization of people being in sales-driven businesses and deep-seated relationship advice-driven businesses. I think we see a lot of people not being what they want to be. So they invest in things that they're not really are. So I think they've got to be careful about being true to what they want to be. And then who they partner with. I mean, so this is an obvious place to have that discussion. So I think choosing the right partners, whether it's a platform partner, a provider, it doesn't matter. I think the mistake is not to choose partners that help you build your client proposition. You know, too often we see them building partnerships for price or whatever that might be. I think they need to get much more client-centric about it, and two, they must choose partners that help them get there. So I think those partnership pieces we think are critical. And whether it's a network provider or a platform provider or whomever, a technology provider, I think those partnerships, I don't think you can do it today without partnerships.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on the partnership side. I just want to step back to that tech piece, if I may. And you quite rightly, in my opinion, highlighted that you've got these different pieces of tech, but it's all part of a whole tech stack, right? And sometimes it does speak to each other and sometimes they don't speak to each other. And I always think of tech as actually being the thing that needs to do the boring things, right? The transactional things, because we've got humans to do the really cool stuff, the interaction with the clients. But so how do you manage that balance between tech doing the boring stuff, people doing the cool interacting stuff, but actually giving personalization at scale? How do you manage that, Ian?
No, I mean, you're going to start asking me bot questions in a minute, and I don't think
I won't go there. I promise you I won't go there.
No. So I think you've got to humanize tech. You have to. I think you've got to build digital portals to clients, and you've got to. The big trick is exactly what you're talking about. You have to work out how you humanize the touch points through technology. I also don't think technology now is used for the boring pieces. I mean, our big investment at the moment is how we take data and turn it into intelligent data. And so AI is becoming really important, but it's expensive. So I think you've got to move. I think we all have to go through a mind shift of thinking about technology to do what we don't want to do, and start thinking about how it helps us engage with clients better, how it helps us make tough decisions, etc., etc. So I think that movie's changed, but it's expensive, and you need to know where to put your effort and your priority. I think I don't know whether you're having the same kind of deliberations, but certainly those are the key things for us in the tech space.
Absolutely, the same challenges and the same strategy around that. I think for us, we spent the last 3 years looking at what's out there in the market, and the decision at the end of the day was that we need to collect the data. And 20 years ago, that was impossible. I think it's a lot more possible now, although it remains a significant challenge. Clients have products everywhere. And in order to give that client that holistic view of his financial well-being, you need the data. So that for us is a key focus. And the rest is really being able to integrate with partners that cater for whatever the advisor feels comfortable with, because you're not going to change many of the advisors to start using a particular software system or not. It's just not going to happen. People have preferences. There will always be an advisor that wants to use Excel, but it's about collecting that data and then enabling the advisor to use that data for his client's benefit and for his own benefit.
And when I think about some of the things that we see in the regular press, and we see, the journey that advisors have been on in the last 5 years or so, the growth in compliance, that sort of paperwork stack that they now have to do. Hopefully they're using a digital partner, like Innate maybe, that gets rid of some of that. But you see that compliance. You also see that now there are about 3,000 advisors now in the network space, according to NMG, about 2,000 that sit in the investment specialist and holistic space. So that number's grown hugely. Definitely seeing migration from the GP area and certainly from the Tide area. What are you seeing, what are you seeing the behavior of advisors? What are the reasons they might be coming to join networks?
I I think the tied agency model is a good place for junior advisors to learn about financial planning and to get that exposure and etc. But I think at some point in time, advisors want to attempt to be an entrepreneur, and that means going out there and doing your own thing. And we see that a lot, and some of it works, some of it doesn't work, and I think that touches on what you said earlier. It's just you've got to be quite clear about what is it that you want to do. Are you a paraplanner at the back, or are you a client-facing salesperson? Not everybody is a salesperson, so I think one really needs to be very clear about how you want to deal with that. And then I think as an advisor you need to decide on how are you going to, what is your value proposition and how are you going to deliver that to the client. And then you should start going and looking at what is it, do you want to join someone, do you want to do it yourself? But first do that work before you move forward.
What are you seeing, Ian, as a lot of the reasons why there's a migration towards networks?
Yeah, I think they're networks. So I think the different networks have different propositions. So I think there's quite a big realization how important the client is, and I think so I think the client experience piece, I think it's dawning on lots of people, entrepreneurs, advisors, that they need to position their businesses better for the client experience. So client-led, I think, and I'm not sure all the tied models are client-led. Well, I am sure they're not all client-led. But I think the client-led stuff's important. And then for advisors, I think there are a couple of trick points, So if you can deliver operational independence, if you can let them retain ownership, and if you can provide them with an ecosystem that enables them to plug into, I suppose, world-class infrastructure, they don't have to go and replicate that. They can do that, and as long as they can maintain ownership of their practice and build a great client experience, I think that's a great business model. I mean, it's similar to what we've seen in some of the shared economy places or business models. Uber's doing that in the transportation industry, So I think more and more, I think people are coming to the realization that, your future as a financial advisor isn't necessarily dependent on a corporate. I think you've built a great practice because of who you are, and I think you can leverage it even better, and I think people are realizing that.
And Ian, tell me, so when we think about, when I speak to advisors, a lot of the conversations I have are around how can I maximize the value of my practice?
Yeah.
How can I maximize the PE value? What would you say to an advisor who perhaps asks you that?
Yeah, I think the PE discussion is a much more sophisticated one than necessarily you get just having a casual discussion, how do I improve the value of my business? I think you've got to be very intentional about changing the value of practices. So I mean, I can just tell you what we do. I mean, we run a very detailed practice management capability that assesses a practice across a whole lot of different benchmarks, and we benchmark it against the industry. So we call it practice management variables, and so things like an efficient operating model, your client value proposition, your activity. So who's evaluating your business relative to a whole range of different benchmarks, business benchmarks, to see you're doing the right stuff. So it's almost the business of advice. So I think it's a combination of factors. It's not management and pricing's one, efficient operating model's another, client interaction is. So you almost need a qualitative set of almost variables to assess how well you're running a practice, and then we publish that so people can see it. So you know what you're buying. If you decide you're going to buy a practice, there's a benchmark and an assessment for advisors to review and look at and go, jeepers, okay, this is a well-run business, or it's not. And that informs valuations, and that informs, I guess, return. So more and more, I think that's becoming science. It's not, geez, I'd love to get a great PE for my business. I think it's got much more scientific than that.
Have you seen the same, Heiko?
Yeah, I would agree with that, although I think we've learned over time that every advisor is unique, and there's always something different about how you deal with that particular advisor's practice in terms of valuation, in terms of integration, in terms of working together with that advisor. So it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all. I think that's where smaller businesses like ourselves are well positioned to cater for that. Some advisors have got significant a downstream potential, according to them, and you want to give them the opportunity to unlock that value over time. But I think another important point that was made is that, you know, it's about building value, and I think the networks offer the advisors good space to build value, ownership in the client practice. So, and I think that's where we're really well positioned to cater for that.
Heiko, one of the things that I see, perhaps with some of the smaller advisors, is them trying to do everything themselves. They start off as a fantastic financial advisor, and they build up their book of clients, but then suddenly they find they're managing people. They're also picking funds. They're doing a whole lot, all the compliance themselves. We've had this conversation before about outsourcing and building value perhaps that way. What are your thoughts on outsourcing?
Absolutely the way to go for advisors. I think it's impossible to do it all. I mean, the reality is that we've got a group compliance manager, we've got a group risk manager, group financial manager. They look at all the strategic components or whatever is happening in their particular field of expertise, and they will filter that and come with a 3-slide presentation on the implementation of Papaya. Can you imagine as an individual having to read through all of this and then implement all of that yourself? It becomes impossible. So outsourcing is the way to go. We outsource a lot of functions where possible, and where economies of scale are beneficial, and I do not see how, as a advisor, as an entrepreneur, as a business manager myself, I can do all of that. I think we've got a lot of examples of advisors that have tried to build that back-end capacity themselves, only to come back and say, please, let me go and do what I'm good at, and you take care of this back office administration and functions.
Heiko, I'm going to stop you there just to remind our audience we will be switching our power supply around about 10 o'clock because we're going to be coming out of load shedding. Please do bear with us. We're probably going to go down for about 15 seconds while our astronaut changes the power over, and we'll be back up online. So don't panic when we disappear off the screen. Please just bear with us. Thanks. Ian, tell me, what are your thoughts about outsourcing? How do you see advisors managing this minefield, perhaps? What do they outsource? What should they outsource? What shouldn't they outsource?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because it's personality dependent, which I think was your point. So I absolutely agree with the point that less about what to out, more about specialization, I think, is probably our position on it. Yeah, I think we've been very specific in that we've tried to move most of our staff, whether it's an advisor or support staff, into the client interface space. So it's about how close you can get to the customer. Everything at the back end, let's call it specialization, we've tried to move to experts. So most of the more we can move our staff complement to the front end of the value chain, so the client interface, I think the bigger impact you're having on ownership of client and the relationship. So ours comes from a slightly different place. It's advisors are brilliant at building client relationships. That's that's the essence of what they do. Obviously, there's capacity and technology and solutions to plan, but I think the client ownership is critical, and I think one should actually try and move your team as close to clients as possible. Outsource the pieces that I think, I guess, specialists can manage. That's kind of been our approach.
And it comes back to that point you were making earlier. Decide who you want to be. Decide the kind of advisor you want to be, right?
I think so.
And that comes back to your client value proposition.
Yeah.
What is your client value proposition? One of our previous guests on this show said a very wise thing. He said, if you've never turned away a client, you haven't got a client value proposition. And that's, I think, key in terms of actually deciding what you want to be.
Yeah.
So tell me, one of the other things that advisors talk to me about around, particularly around, their future and what they're looking to do. Heiko, if I can come to you on this, they often talk about succession planning and what does it look like for them? What are the options and opportunities for me? And we've spoken a little bit about growing the value of your practice and the PE, but succession is also a big deal, and we see a lot of practices where the son or the daughter's coming in, sometimes under duress, and really, what are those conversations you're having with advisors?
Very interesting. I think It's very difficult when you're a one-man show or a small business to cater for that. Even for us as a business with 550 employees, we have an annual meeting and talk about succession planning in the group, and even there are gaps that are difficult to fill. So for an advisor to deal with that on his own must be really a significant challenge. So how do you deal with that? You obviously need to have a relationship where you can share that confidential information, and you can make sure that if something happens to you, which happens, and it does happen, then the value of what you've created and built your whole life is taken care of. And we've seen where it's been done properly and the success with that, and we've seen where there wasn't anything and the total collapse and destruction of value in those instances. And I think that's one of our key focuses, is to make sure that there's proper succession planning. And we regularly support advisors to acquire practices where succession was part of the plan. But critical for any successful business is to have proper succession planning in place.
Is that a conversation you're also having a lot with advisors, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I think the succession planning thing is probably the most underrated component of a proposition in the network space. I think it's finding vogue more and more. It is one of the key, so that and ownership are the key kind of decision points, I think, for a lot of advisors migrating to networks. And not that networks work for everybody. I think, and succession is difficult, and it's difficult because I think it's easier in advice practices than sales practices, if you excuse the terminology. And I think it's different because your advice process has got to become so systematic across your entire business that the client proposition becomes driven by the depth and quality of the advice process, not the individual disposition of the advisor. Because succession becomes successful. I'd hate to say that after a few beers, but I think succession becomes successful when the advice process becomes bigger than the relationship between the advisor and his clients. And then I think you've got a recipe for a successful transaction. So you've got to create more and more emphasis on systematic advice process, and I think that comes from how that lands at the client end. And once the client becomes used to convention, a great client experience becomes convention, you then have a recipe for succession. You then add to that practice management models I was talking about in terms of value, and then I think you're starting to build the ingredients for a successful transition model, if that's the right terminology. So succession models then become really viable. I think they're going to continue to evolve to become the most critical component of any network proposition, and I can hear you seeing the same.
That's interesting, thank you. I want to raise us up a few thousand feet, if I may. Ian, perhaps you can tell me how 2022 was for you, because if I can just replay some of the conversations I've had with advisors, 2022 was tough. It was on the back of two very difficult years, and I think there was an expectation at the start of 2022 that we were going to be on a bounce after COVID, and things were going to turn out a lot better than perhaps for some people they did. I'm hearing conversations or having conversations with advisors where their clients are, what with the war and various other things, the rising cost of living, they're battling to keep their clients invested. And there's an element of loss of hope, perhaps, with some of those conversations. How did you fare in 2022, and what are your advisor conversations going like?
So I think we've been lucky, and I always say, it's better to be lucky than good. So we were lucky. Back in sort of 2020, we'd got through the digitalization, if you like, hump. So we had digitalized the client experience, and as a consequence, COVID was good for us. We had an exceptional client reaction to engagement, this humanizing of client contact, particularly at the advisor level. We went paperless. We created a capability for advisors to interact really successfully with clients, and as a consequence, we had a surge in business in 2020, from 20 all the way through to 2021. So on the back of that, we had a whole lot of new advisors. So We had a really good business result, very disappointing when you have contracting capital markets, rand appreciating, increased compliance, all the things we've had. I think the fundamentals were tough. We fortunately had a good year, we had a solid year, disappointing, and I think everybody had a disappointing year last year. So I think the point you make is we were all disappointed. How you actually fared, I guess is how you came into the year. The conversations for advisors, I think more and more are, jeepers, tough year. It might be time to consider a different operating model. That's good for networks. It's not necessarily good for the industry. It's good for networks. It's not necessarily good for the industry. So I think because of that, we probably were lucky we've been positioned the way we have been. But I don't think everybody experienced that, and it's tough. I think they've had a very tough year. The questions of hope are real ones. How do you sit, I think we've got to be realistic. I think I think we've got to be really, really honest about where we find ourselves and the constraints we have around growth, employment, and so on. So is there hope for a good recovery in 2023? I would probably say that that hope's waning fast. You can feel it in the environment. But I don't think all's lost. I mean, I think there is also a very strong realization that perhaps politics aren't going to drive necessarily for all South Africans, aren't necessarily going to drive the growth engines too far into the future. I think load shedding is a great example. I mean, we've just been off,
We haven't gone off yet.
We haven't gone yet. Okay, well, any minute now we're going to go. I mean, that's how we live, right? That's a great advertisement for you need capability to build capability for growth in South Africa, and I don't think that's going to come from politics. I think more and more key industries are going to go into privatization, not because of a political will, because of economic necessity. So I think more and more key network industries that are going to give rise to growth, there's a realization we need to do something differently. I don't think politics is going to solve it. I think the private sector will have to. I don't think there is any other way. Well, certainly I can't see it. So I don't think it's despair, and I do think markets anticipate these things. So I don't think it's hopeless, but I think we're going to go through one of our toughest challenges in the next 2 years, particularly as we go to the polls. Our biggest concerns really relate to social cohesion, as we have, a change in perhaps the political landscape. I think we need social cohesion, and everybody's got a part to play in that.
So not hopeless, challenging
Absolutely
in
not.
2023.
Yeah,
That's what I'm hearing
absolutely.
from you.
Absolutely.
Heiko, how about you?
Yeah, we had the same. We had a great last couple of years. I think we delisted just after COVID started, and I think the private equity investors that came in, obviously they at that point in time they measured their investment and were quite concerned with what's happening, so they really got us focused. And that really helped us. Our agenda for our meetings was a lot of corporate governance, and then sales was one of the items. Now we have a 2-hour sales meeting before we have the general meeting with all the management, and it's really sales focused and client focused. What do we do for our clients? How do we make sure that we can cater for the environment and the changing needs? So our business focus has really changed over the last couple of years, and it's really been very rewarding. For clients, it's obviously been a lot different experience, and we see, there's returns are difficult. Clients, there's a lot of pressure to look at alternative investments, to come up with ideas. How are we going to do better? What are we going to do for the future? What about structuring? What are we going to do to get better returns over the longer term? So product development, teamwork to look at how we're going to address all of that remains a key focus, and we have to come up as an industry, we have to come up with ideas how to deliver for our clients. So there's a key focus ongoing on that. 2023, I think it'll be more of the same, and the future, I think things change fast nowadays. It's not 20 years ago, things moved a lot slower. Things change fast. We need to adapt to the changing environment. We can't, load shedding, we got to install solar. Water is next. What are we going to do about boreholes and water? This is the environment we operate in, and we need to adapt, and we need to come up with plans, because it's not going to just get better overnight. These are structural issues that are going to take a long time to fix.
And Heiko, when I think about and I look ahead to 2023, I'm assuming, and very natural that your experience of 2022 is informing your strategy for 2023. However, there are some quite big dark clouds on the horizon for 2023. I'm thinking grey listing as a very likely potential outcome, February-March time, ongoing war in Ukraine, and cost of living perhaps not really improving for people. How are you addressing that in your business? What are the kind of initiatives that you've got going on which perhaps will look to overcome some of that stuff?
No, it's a tough one. I think one can speculate about what's going to happen, etc., and one can take a position on that. I received a report this morning that's quite bullish on South African equity returns. So, what's the call that you're going to make around that? I think it's really having the professional people assist the clients make the better decision, and that's the work of the financial advisor. One thing I've learned in the 20 odd years in financial services is if you've got a good plan, stick with it. I've seen how many times people exit at the wrong time and try and catch it it just doesn't work. So if you've got a good plan, stick with that. And I think that's our work as a business, to make sure that our clients have good plans and stay with those plans. But for us to predict what's going to happen with regards to inflation, I think we all have a view, and one has to find your way through all of those variables on an ongoing basis.
Ian, what are your key challenges and key initiatives for 2023?
Yeah, keeping clients invested is tough. I mean, I think great plans will, you got to keep people, they've got to stick to plans, and you've got to get through that. I think strategically though, so we've got a few. So our biggest kind of investments at the moment are, as we were talking about it earlier, intelligent data and complete digitalization at the client end. So why? And that's to build better MIS, so information to make better decisions, and so you can improve that client's capability. But that also gives us another capability, and I think it's a mobile capability, so a remote capability. We've got more and more advisors or clients immigrating, so we can service clients. Our plans are to build a digital capability, so we've got an advisory platform that can be accessed anywhere in the world, and we've got people now operating from Mauritius, Belgium, all over, and these are advisors also that are immigrating, managing South African clients. So mobility, I think, is important. Not that we're advocating you should do that, but it does happen. So those are some of the key things. I mean, the other ones are growth. So a lot of growth initiatives into some of the spaces that you've already entered. So how do you extend your advice processes into preservation, short-term, some of those types of opportunities we haven't perhaps touched. We were deeply investment orientated, but I think we're extending those. And then the third one's an interesting one, and it's probably my favorite. It's getting everybody in our business invested in our business. So rights issues, offering people the opportunity to buy into a company, to become passionate about the broader organization, and keeping them invested, if that's the right terminology. So those are probably our big ones. Yeah.
Interesting, and you touched on the multi-generational and wealth transfer conversation there, which I think is very topical as well at the moment.
Yeah.
Schroders has done some super work on looking at, what happens once, the main breadwinner, which often is the man in the family, dies. Within 5 years in the UK, the wife tends to get rid of the financial advisor. So really, that kind of that multi-generational family advising. So just not just multi-generational, but between spouses as well.
Yeah.
Is that something that you're also
very much so. So I think the old way to give financial advice is you gave financial advice to the head of a family, right? So I mean, I think you've got to change all of that. You've got to provide financial advice with a family, and not just the dad or the mom, whoever the key kind of, call it stakeholder, or the key person is. I think you've got to plan with families, and as soon as you do that, so it does require lifestyle financial planning, so it's less needs-based, much deeper advice-based, and it's more holistic. So I think if you plan with families, intergeneration, and your client engagement stuff is enabled, not just to the mom or the dad, but to the entire family. So you're giving people access, you're sending them telling them what's happening in markets, whatever's happening overnight. I think you engage with them, not to them. I think that's changed.
Heiko, are you seeing a lot of work, or are you actually doing a lot of work in that space?
No.
Particularly, I think South Africa has a much greater challenge than perhaps where Schroders carried out their survey, where they came up with these various statistics. You know, South Africa has challenges where it's kind of a rite of passage for the next generation to go over to the UK, go overseas to Australia, spend a few years. Sometimes they stay, sometimes they come back. You know, it's a real challenge for the South African family, I think.
You have to adapt your business to that. Exactly the way it works doesn't work anymore. If you don't invest in technology, in products and services and ways of doing things to service that different client base, you're not going to be in business for very long. So we've been very busy with looking at how do we cater for that younger generation? You know, is it digital assets, hedge funds, alternative products, private equity? These questions are being asked. The father might have been very happy with the way things were done. The younger generation, professionally qualified, they ask very different questions, and they want to access it digitally. They want to know exactly what's going on today. So. And if you don't invest in your business to get to that point, your business is going to not be around.
But there are also interesting times, you know, everybody jumped, it's been recent, everybody jumps up and down. A lot of advisors about robo-advice. We've had robo-advice tools for 2-3 years now. The number of people using robo-advice tools in South Africa are minute. And it might come from, you know, the security of having a discussion, and I think it's good having a relationship with an advisor. They need, you know, they need to take you through what's happening, and I think capital markets are complex. Capital market regulations complex. I don't see a massive wave, certainly not now, to bot-driven investing, and yeah, I might be wrong, but certainly we're not seeing it.
No, I would agree with that. I think the future for advisors is bright. I said if I had another go at this, I would want to be a financial planner. I think with everything that you've got access to now and with all the complexities of it, it's a great opportunity, similar to being an accountant or chartered accountant or a lawyer. I think it's a great profession to take on.
A bot might give you a better answer to how cryptos work, because I haven't worked it out yet. So anyway.
But we spoke earlier about using tech in the right place, and I am seeing advisor firms, some of them using robo-advice to manage the tail, you know, the 80% of clients who actually cause you probably quite a lot of pain in your business as well. Is there a space for that, Ian?
Perhaps. I mean, I see more AI applications in the investment management industry, algorithms, the management of smart alpha, I mean, there's so many smart things, right? Smart beta, you decide, but I see a greater requirement for some of those kind of tech plays in actually the investment management than I do in actually the people pieces. I do.
What about you, Heiko?
Well, we've got a strategy which we call expand the client base through industry transformation. And what does that mean? It means that our original client pool is becoming smaller, and we need to expand that client base. We need to ensure that we get access to clients that previously didn't have access to financial services. And the reality is that initially you're going to have to do that through technology, and you have to educate that individual through technology. And then that at some point in time you need to introduce
sooner or later. Tell me when we're back on. Good conversation, guys. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. That was the short interlude, which enabled us to change the power supply back over. Thank you very much for bearing with us. Ian, if I might just jump to you, I'd like you to think about the industry as a whole. What are some of the things that you can see coming down the line in our industry? I'm thinking maybe some consolidation. I'm thinking increased regulation, or perhaps compliance burden. Some of the things that are really kind of battling or perhaps keeping you up at night. What do you see happening in our industry over the coming months and years? Yeah,
so I mean, I think the things you've mentioned now have been coming for a long time. I think you're going to continue to see consolidation. I think you're going to continue to see regulation. I mean, we were talking about it earlier. Property, AML, anti-money laundering, I mean, just the regulation, the changes to fit and proper all the time. The regulation is becoming massive. Some of the big risks. So I think the requirement for technology is becoming absolutely critical, and it is a fear I have in smaller IFA firms, and even some of the tied markets. I think hacking. I think some of the cybercrime stuff has got to. I mean, it's got to unbelievable proportions. So your security encryption protocols these days have really got to be tight. You're dealing with people's money. So I think that's something that we really worry about. So security of data. Less funds, more security of data, and cybercrime, I think, is a big issue. The other ones have been around for a while, so I think you're going to see consolidation continue, and you can tell why. I mean, you can feel it coming. I think a real big problem, and Heike mentioned it, is we are certainly seeing a contraction of clients, and we're seeing that, I suppose, with our, I suppose, the economic kind of climate of the country. We're seeing a lot of wealth migrate. We've got to build capability to manage offshore wealth better. I think that's something that we worry about. It's interesting though, so South Africans are a strange bunch. When they immigrate, they keep their South African advisors. It is fantastic, but you've got to make them accessible. So I think for advice firms, they've got to create accessibility for people that have left the country to actually manage their wealth back into, not necessarily in South Africa, it might be abroad. So that the trusted relationships live large, and I think that's great. So there isn't a whole lot of new stuff I'm massively worried about. I think this stuff's been coming for a long time. And I think the bigger concerns we have is just getting through this next kind of couple of years while we revert out of a high interest rate cycle into a new growth cycle, and we start seeing, certainly some glimmers of hope on the growth end in network industries, so we can see employment. I think the last point is you're losing skills. I mean, we are losing great skills, great people. Those are my concerns. So it's more a macro, socio-economic, socio-political maybe concerns for where we find ourselves. But you've got to work through that, as you were saying.
Heike, what do you see this industry battling with over the next few years? Do you also see the same kind of things on the horizon as Ian?
No, I do. I'd like to also say that I think we've got a very sophisticated and very capable financial services industry that delivers great outcomes to clients. I mean, relative to anything in the world, I don't think we stand back anywhere. So advisors have access to great products, great assistance, great skills in the South African marketplace to really do well for their clients. So, and I mean, what we've experienced in the last 15 years, I think we've taken the bulk of the pain in moving from, just call it financial services, to a professional industry. I mean, it's really professionalized. I recall when I bought my first policy, it's a very different experience to what it is today. So I think the big pain's been taken, and I think we're well positioned as an industry, and I think young people entering the industry have got a great future ahead of them. Yes, there will be more regulatory challenges down the road. It's inevitable, but we'll deal with them like we dealt with phase and all of that. It's doing the right thing when nobody's looking, is what we like to say. It's how you do business. The rules are not going to make a difference. That's just how you operate.
I love that phrase, doing the right things when nobody's looking. That's a very great way of looking at things. So, gentlemen, I've got a couple of questions that have come in. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for sending your questions in. Please don't hold back. We've got a little bit of time to get through some questions. The first one's from Jen, my friend Jen. Hello, Jen. Ian, this is to you.
Hello, Jen.
Do you think the investment portion of RDR will indeed roll out? And if so, what do you think the biggest change is that it will bring to your business?
Sure, I'm not really sure. I mean, I think RDR as a whole has taken so much longer to land than any of us expected. I mean, I think we were all expecting quite a quick. I mean, we built AdviceWorks largely on the view that we'd go through a regulatory change and RDR would be implemented, but it's been very slow. I think there's some reasons for that. I mean, I think we've been through, there are a whole lot of reasons for that. So I think the RDR rollout is going to be much slower than we've anticipated. I like that comment about do the right things when no one's looking. I think building proper advice models, I think independence of advice, and I think managing advice risk through independence is going to become the key issue in an RDR world. And I think you've got to build a business that is future fit already. So it's almost what Heiko was saying as a concept. So I think we've tried to build that as a principle. More and more, I think more businesses will do that because it's the right thing to do, not because it's a great thing to do, it's the right thing to do for the client. And if you're not client-centric, I think you're going to come second.
I mean, Heiko, first RDR paper came out in 2014. Since then, we've seen various iterations of various ideas. It's been, pretty soft landing, I think, for RDR compared with other countries like the UK. What's your view on RDR and where that's going to take a business like yours in the future?
Yeah, I think a lot's been said about that. I think we're quite comfortable that we have the resources, the infrastructure, and the skills in-house to make sure that our advisors don't have to deal with all the challenges that come with that. So it's really about having that capacity to, whatever it may be, we don't know, and when we don't know. I mean, as was mentioned, I mean, a lot should have already been implemented, but we'll deal with that. I don't see that as a significant hurdle.
Yeah. Heiko, this one's for you from Rajan. Thanks, Rajan. Heiko, are you expecting your advisors to do everything, health, wealth, risk, short term, or are we going back to specialists?
That's a very good question. And I think by nature, advisors feel a comfort with a certain line of business, whether it's investment, risk, or anything else. But we as a business make sure that if that client comes to you and says, I now need you to help me with this because we've got that relationship, then we as a business are able to assist you to deal with that. And it means you might not do that business, but somebody in the group is going to help you to ensure that that client relationship remains with you. And it's a massive opportunity, and we're seeing it all the time. Advisors joining us because they cannot offer all those services, and we've got the specialists to help them to offer that service. The advisor's got that client relationship. Why lose that relationship because you cannot offer A, B, or C to the client? So critically important for us that we really need to be able to provide, if it's an external service provider or an internal service provider, the expertise has to be there to help you as an advisor service the client.
Ian, you grew up predominantly as an investment business, as you said earlier, but you're also exploring other avenues just as a way to grow and offer more things to your clients. What are you asking your advisors to do? To have a tentacle out into the risk world, or are you putting risk and healthcare specialists in your business?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm working on it. But no. But I think the first piece lies in your advice models. So I think we've got a slightly different bent on our advice models. So help someone build a life map, not a need map. So part of that is protection. Part of that is growth. There are different parts of that. I think the pieces of solutions that are commoditized, you can use technology to execute, and you can do them through what I call broker direct models. I think they've been done very successfully all over the world. So I think some of the commoditized business will use tech to execute. I think some of the more specialist ones we will refer to specialists. I mean, we've used paraplanning very extensively across our network. So we have paraplanners that help and facilitate some of the deep-seated planning stuff, and so the introduction of specialists to help execute on some of those specialist components, I think, is part of our model already. So, and the other parts we're going to use tech, so that we can just keep it really efficient. Yeah.
Gentlemen, we're out of time. Are there any closing words you'd like to say to our audience before we wrap it up?
Yes, well, thanks again for the invitation. I think I really enjoyed it, and to all the advisors out there and the service providers and product providers, thank you. It's really a great industry to be part of and a great journey.
Thanks, Heiko. Ian?
Yeah, probably to echo that. I mean, I think just Perhaps a comment to advisors is be who you are and build businesses around that disposition. Don't be something you're not. And I think clients identify with that, and whatever you do, spend more and more time building the client interface and less time worrying about the back. That would kind of be my 2 cents worth, and thanks for having us, Georgina.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found it as insightful and beneficial as I have. Look forward to seeing you in the next few weeks when we've got various webinars coming up. You'll be hearing about them on the email very soon. You'll get your CPD point via email after this, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Innate is a registered trademark of Stanlib Wealth Management Pty Limited, an authorised financial services provider.